The New Mexico Penitentiary riot of 1980 was one of the most bloody, vicious, and deadly riots in American prison history. So let's talk about it. Hey, what's up everybody? Shout out to all the law-abiding criminals out there. As always, this is your first time on the channel, you know what to do. Go ahead and subscribe. Click that notification bell so you don't miss anything. Also, if you like this prison life movement, man, you enjoy what we're doing and where we're headed with this thing, you can show your love by clicking that Patreon link in the description below. You could also pick up a copy of my book, Strength and Conviction, From Prison to Positive Change. That link will also be in the description below. Yes, man, February the 2nd, 1980. As far as prisons go in America, one of the most infamous days in history. New Mexico Penitentiary riot, which kicked off, I think, around 1 a.m. in the morning. I'm going to be covering that in this video, and I want to go ahead and warn you, there's going to be a lot of graphic footage, images, so if you're not into that, you can go ahead and leave. This video will be a little lengthy because I'm going to be chopping in a documentary that was filmed actually on this riot, and I'll be talking over some of the footage and everything. You probably won't see my face that much in this video. I'm going to try to be as concise as possible, give you guys the facts, man, because when I found out about this riot, which for some reason I actually never knew about until I Googled it, thinking about the Lee County incident, I found out about this thing. It's very intriguing, interesting, sad, gory, to say the least. So I'm going to hit you guys with that today. I will put a link in the description that will give you, the original story. You can click over to that video if you want to watch the whole entire thing. So briefly, like I said, this Lee County incident got me to thinking about what were the deadliest riots in American prison history, because I kept seeing the headlines that kept saying that Lee was the deadliest in over 25 years. And in fact, it is. But it got me to thinking about it, so that's whenever I Googled it. And before people get in the comments and try to point out the fact that the Attica riot had more deaths, it actually did, which for those of you that don't know, that happened in 1971. I may cover it in a future video. It happened at Attica prison in New York. It did have more deaths. I think there were 48 in that one, and the New Mexico Penitentiary riot only had 34, or they speculate 34, because they say some deaths might not be accounted for because some people were literally burnt like to nothing, I guess, because the guys have blowtorches or acetylene torches. So anyway, the reason why New Mexico is considered worse is because Attica, the bulk of the deaths that happened there were from friendly fire after the, well, I ain't gonna say after the riot was over, but it was when the state police decided to retake the prison. They threw in gas bombs and they just started firing into the smoke, and they killed like 9 of their own guards, and God, like 30-something inmates. And so that is the reason why it's really not considered the most bloody or violent or deadly, because the New Mexico riot was 100% inmate on inmate, and just from sheer violence and anger and hatred. So there's that clarification. Without further ado, let's get into it.
This is the penitentiary, New Mexico, which in the course of a February weekend in 1980 was the scene of the most brutal riot in American prison history.
All the forces of hell were unleashed, and it happened right there. Never seen that much rage, overt, touchable rage and hate.
I'd never realized that people could be so inhumane. It was overkill. I heard people being tortured to death just feet from me, screaming and crying and pleading for their life.
The events leading up to the New Mexico riot were a lot stemming from overcrowding, which kind of mirrors the incidents in the South Carolina Department of Corrections to me. They were having 3 men in a 2-man cell, just like they're doing in South Carolina right now.
It just got to be insane. I mean, they they were just jam-packing people into them. And at one point, I know there was close to 100 in the dormitories. I mean, it had went from single bunks to bunk beds, and then to people sleeping on the floors.
By early 1978, a combination of overcrowding and undermanning was making the dormitories virtual no-go areas.
So if you're wondering where a lot of this footage of the inmates and stuff that you're about to see is coming from, it's because coincidentally, they were just filming a documentary on this prison. I think it was called Doing Time, just a couple of months before all of these events took place in the New Mexico penitentiary riot. And I just find that very interesting because there's actual footage of inmates predicting that this was going to happen if they didn't make any changes. So also some of the things that led up to this incident was the fact that they were being abused by the guards. They were doing things like, putting the snitch jacket on people, which just basically meant telling everybody that they were snitches so they could try to create strife between the inmates and keep it off of the guards. That way they hated each other and not them.
What the snitch system did was to deflect the hatred and resentment inmates felt for the authorities towards the inmates held here in cell block 4.
So basically what you had were two different sides of the yard, and they were separated by what kind of dorm they were. You had cell blocks, which were obviously cells that had doors that closed, and then you had dormitories, which were all open. They would keep the lower security, less dangerous guys in the dormitories, and then they would keep the more dangerous guys in the cell blocks. And so cell block 4 was actually used as a lockdown unit for segregation, as protection for guys who had snitched or, were sex offenders or whatever the case may be. It was where they put those guys to keep them away from all of the dangerous killers.
On the night of Friday, February the 1st, 1980, there were 12 officers supervising 1,157 inmates, or so it was estimated. The exact population was not known.
Sounds pretty familiar, right? 12 officers supervising 2,000 dangerous convicts. Sounds exactly like what's happening in SCDC.
This is where I was having breakfast. About 1:30 in the morning with Tonio Vigil. That's when we heard I was going to leave, and he says, have a cup of coffee with me. I said, oh, okay, I guess I could take another 5 minutes. That's where we heard a really strange, loud grumbling noise. The strangest thing you could hear at 1:30. It was 1:45 in the morning. That's when we came out to the hall, and we saw literally hundreds of inmates just pouring out of the dormitories. And I said, my God, what is going on? I thought maybe a fight had broken out into the hallways, and I said, no, it's just not reasonable a fight that big could break loose. I was going to rush down and try and close those grills over there, but it seemed like as though somebody was guarding those grills dressed in an officer's uniform. And I didn't recognize the individuals. And then that's when I saw that they were kicking an individual. I believe it came out to be Juan Bustos, an officer, literally rolling him down the hallway with kicks, and it was, I would say, anywhere between 100 and 200 individuals. And they were just filling out, and it was just mass chaos. And that's when we exited up towards the control center. And I banged on the windows to the control center, and I head out back up to the north side of the facility instead of going out the front door. My feelings then were that it was over with, because we had some really very dangerous inmates in this institution.
So up until this point, no one had been killed quite yet, but they actually did not realize just how bad it was going to get. They knew that it had the potential to get that way, but they really had no idea, what was coming. And it was going to be very, very bad.
I remember the first guy that died was a guy who normally cleaned up the hall. Was a snitch informant. Had somebody took a pipe, hit him in the head, a piece of his skull flew up against the wall. Body started quivering as he lay on the ground. It was like the first death, and you just start realizing, this is a lot of potential to be violent, just a lot of potential. And things just started escalating from there.
There was an execution squad running around killing people.
So one of the things that I cut out of the video, I'm going to have to tell you that the inmates coming down that hall initially overtook the control room, and now they have keys to the whole entire prison. And so what has happened, they have found acetylene torches in one of the dorms that was having construction done, and they are on their way to cell block 4 to break into where all the snitches are. Among other kinds of death, there were red hot pieces of metal that were shoved through people's heads, decapitation, just stabbings, you name it, and it happened here that night.
Early Saturday morning, myself and another canine officer, Buddy Size, we're watching with binoculars and just watching the activities because they're just raising Cain inside. And we watched the guy being held up by two individuals. And he was standing basically looking like he was looking out the window, but he's not looking out. And they had a torch, and they just started cutting on his face with a torch. And they started working on his eyeballs with a torch. And all of a sudden his head exploded. I guess the gas is building up with the heat of the acetylene.
By this time, the prison was surrounded by hundreds of state police, National Guard. I believe the Army was there. It was on fire. It was also being flooded in some of the lower levels. It was just complete chaos, pandemonium, and nobody knew what to do because they had 12 officers hostage.
And this is where the real terror really came in. That's when individuals walked in here and said to us, you want to see how serious the situation this has come down? This individual came up in front of us and was literally holding a human head. And it is quite traumatizing to speak about this still, but he put this head right in front of each one of us, and they told us to choose which one of us would be next. This decapitation. I didn't realize what it was, and I said, my God, to Edwards, could that be something from the kitchen? He says, no. He about went into shock. It was a human head. It was a black man's head.
And as you can see here, those marks in the concrete are actually marks from either an axe or a shovel that decapitated that individual. And on the right there, you see burn marks, which they say is from where a body was completely burned down with acetylene torches. And here you see these are inmates that were trying to escape the violence on the inside by congregating out by the fences where they could be seen by the state police and the National Guard who were there.
No, I knew the inmates so well, I was having grave difficulty identifying them. With their face that close to mine, I couldn't tell you who they were, or had been, because they had been so horribly brutalized. He was hanging from the grill work separating the officer station from the north corridor by a rope or a piece of sheet knotted together or something. His throat had been cut. His genitals had been cut off. And they were stuffed in his mouth. It wasn't a safe place. Not for Mario. He should never have even been in the penitentiary, let alone there and then.
And there he was speaking of a guy who was in that penitentiary just for a shoplifting charge. He had been gang raped by 7 inmates and moved to that dorm for his protection, and it failed him. So guys, that is a very brief version of the events that happened. 34 dead in the most brutal possible ways that you could even imagine, from decapitation to molten hot metal rods being shoved through their head, people with their genitals removed, stuffed into their mouths. Guards were actually raped. No guards were killed, but some were beaten really bad, raped, and it was just all around the most horrific night in United States penal history, hands down.